Welcome to the Retrospect podcast, a show where people come together from different walks of life and discuss a topic from their generation's perspective. My name is Ian, and as always, I'm joined by Jason.
Hello, everyone.
And Miranda.
Hello.
For the time being, for the interim.
I like Miranda being here.
So I got to fill in for Stoney. You know, I got to
right.
represent.
Yeah,
represent.
Stoney's here in spirit, so
right.
he'd like to be here, but he needs to heal up.
Speaking of Stoney being here in spirit, Jason was filling the place of Stoney a second ago whenever we were talking about stuff, and he was like, "That's a pretty good pre-show conversation. When are we going to start recording those?" And I was like, there's Stoney.
I'm telling you, I think we have some really good discussions. That would make a pre-show. So
you're right. Our conversations do kind of go all over the place, but I think sometimes we do have some pretty good. We land on some pretty good stuff.
We'd have to strategically. I mean, I don't know if I would be to want to do them all the time, but I think depending on the topic, I think that certain topics lend themselves where you can kind of do a general discussion,
right,
about whatever you're talking about, and then maybe go into a little bit more in depth.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't do a pre-show, but I do think that having like 15 minutes of like an after show where either like we continue the conversation about what we talked about in the actual episode, or again, we decide to kind of talk about like, how we're feeling, or, I think it'd be cool to do that. Like maybe some like recommendations where like if you guys have seen any movies or had anything nice to drink or, something like that, you know what I mean? Like where it's like, what are you doing?
That's when we could read things from the reader bag.
There you go. Yeah. Or like something like that. So that's
Ian. I mean, you're the tech guy here,
right.
So I mean, you've got to step up to the plate.
You're right. I'm not saying. Hear me when I say that the suggestion has not fallen on deaf ears. I just want to know how we're going to execute it. That's the only thing. So.
Well, if you record it and you don't use it, it's no harm, no foul.
Right.
If you record it and you use it, then you've got something as a backup for, when things happen, when stuff hits the fan, you've got backup stuff. And if you have a really good pre-show and it's 45 minutes and, we need to make an hour and 10 minutes out of it, well, then we can say, you know what, let's finish off this conversation because it had a great start.
You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something we need to, I just think we need to kind of take that next step. I think it would help us.
Okay.
So, but I think today we're talking about psychics.
What does that mean to you?
Well, are they real?
Okay. Are they real?
The $1 million question.
Yeah, are they real? I mean, it's we are,
especially right on the heels of our alien conversation we just had. We're
I mean, psychics kind of fall under a broad umbrella. I mean, it's really a broad term, but I mean, it's.
And we live in the South where there's a lot of cultural,
Voodoo,
and religious differences that come into play here, or give overtones to this conversation. But I think this will be an interesting one.
Yeah, I agree. Well, what is a psychic? Ian,
what is a psychic?
What is it to you?
The first thing I think of is if you've ever been down to New Orleans, there's like this culture of people that are like tarot card readers and like fortune tellers, palm readers, and
divination,
crystal ball type people,
clairvoyance,
voodoo type stuff. Like that whole like genre, that whole vibe is kind of what I would put underneath the blanket term of psychic. Now, is that the technical term? I don't know. That's just the first thing that comes to my mind is because again, I've been to New Orleans, before, and I've seen those kind of people, or I've been in the company with those and those kind of people have like the astrology type people that have like this,
fortune tellers,
right? This higher understanding of like the world and how we're all just, it feels like that. It feels very psychic like or whatever. That's just.
I pulled some things here. The word psychic is derived from a Greek word called psychikos, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Greek.
Meaning of the mind or mental. And the word refers to the psyche of the human mind. It also can mean soul.
Oh.
And in Greek mythology, the maiden name Psyche was a deification of the human soul.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, even at this earliest time, we can see the connections between the psychic and the spiritual world. So you could see how that kind of thing got meshed together.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Especially like before, I don't want to say before Christianity, but before like in that time where it feels like interesting.
The closest anything would have probably been Hebrew.
Right. But it's like at that point, like even the idea of like a soul and that kind of thing is interesting.
Yeah, that'd be possibly another topic.
Okay,
but no, I got here. It's parapsychology, which is kind of which all this falls under.
Yeah.
It's a study of mental or psychic phenomenon which can't be explained by conventional science as we understand it. Many famous people have looked in on it. Freud, William James, who's a founder of the American Academic of Psychology, and Harvard psychologist Hugo Munsterberg. So there's been a lot of prominent people in the realm of psychology to look at this phenomenon we call psychics, or you've probably heard the term ESP.
Yeah.
So good stuff. Daryl Bem is the most famous modern day psi-friendly psychologist who his 2011 experiments inspired a crisis in his own field. Because guess what? He was actually utilizing the accepted methodology within the realm of psychology. He was proving his point that there is a phenomenon of this psychic energy out there. So, from what I've been able to pick up, the official line from the scientific community is there is no evidence that demonstrates that psychic abilities exist. But there are many people who maybe look at that with a grain of salt.
Right.
And I will be the devil's advocate and pop in. This is my bag here because I grew up. I was a kid in the 70s and the 80s where it was like there was all sorts of psychic books and people on TV, and it was just like we used to sit down and watch Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and all that kind of stuff on TV. And so I grew up with, I think, a much. Well, I will say, because I know that Stoney will be listening to this when it airs. I have a very different opinion of this type of thing than somebody like he who grew up in the Deep South, with a very different religious background than what I have. And, this is a generational show, and I looked up some statistics, and it was like his generation, the baby boomer generation, is less likely to believe in this kind of stuff as opposed to all of the younger generations. So there is that factor in there too. But I'm just going to put it out there that the CIA from the late 70s all the way till 1995, they spent... Publicly, they've admitted to spending over $20 million on studying psychic phenomena, in all sorts of, just from having psychics. The Department of Defense, they were doing all of their what's it called, remote viewing things, and there's been movies on it, like the guys that stare at goats or whatever it was. So it's like our government. When you think about if they've admitted that they've spent over $20 million on it, and then there was another part of it that they said, well, we spent $11 million just on these 3 psychics over a 5-year period. There's going to be a whole bunch of black budget stuff that's way, way more. And the CIA, they really feared a widening psychic gap with the Soviets.
Yes, so they did. I did pick that up.
They were using any means necessary. So I think that there's probably a lot of evidence that psychic phenomena is real. It's just whether you're able to buy into it because of the religious or the cultural I don't want to say baggage because that's not necessarily the right term, but just the mores that you have, what you've been ingrained with, whether you'll admit it exists or not, because clearly it exists. It's just whether people always say to me like, "Oh, I don't believe in chiropractors." And I'm like, "Well, you don't have to believe in it because we're not a faith. We're not something that's intangible. We exist, so it's not something you have to believe in or not believe in." And it's the same thing with this, in my opinion. It's just like it exists. It's there, but are there shysters in the profession? Absolutely, there's shysters in anything.
Of course.
It's just like, look at how many people go to bad repair shops for their automobiles. There's really good mechanics, and you find a good one that you treat them like gold. There's ones that you wouldn't send your most hated neighbor to. And I think that with psychic phenomena, there's so much under that umbrella that, when you start digging, it's just like, just more and more and more keeps coming at you because there's so many different things that are involved. It's not just divination. It's not, does prophecy come into play?
Right. Tarot card reading. Cards. I mean, it's there's all kinds. But you talked about the CIA. That program, I believe, was called Operation Stargate, is what, and it dealt with remote viewing. Yeah. That's what they were worried about with the Soviets. And they're foreseeing future events for military purposes. And you said in 1995, it's so funny, they issued a report in 1990. They declassified a report that concluded the results of the research were inconclusive due to the erroneous nature of the data. Yep. So
there's another Department of Defense report that's out there that said that the Department of Defense apparently suspects that the agency continued with the program on an unofficial basis post-1995. So it just went from, the regular world into the black budget world.
There's another show that I saw that came on TV a few years ago, and right now I'm drawing a blank. I can't remember the name of it, but it was kind of the show was sort of like a documentary, kind of the way it was presented, but it was supposedly, of course, the government denies this. It was the first time the government actually studied from a scientific standpoint possession.
Wow.
Believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And
our pre-show last week.
Yes, I know.
You're right.
Which made me start thinking when I was kind of doing all this research on this psychic stuff. It was like that show came to my mind, and I'm like, what was the name of it? But it ended bad because the person that supposedly was possessed killed everybody in the research center.
Yikes.
And disappeared. They never found her. It was a female. And she didn't kill him by physically. It was like a mental attack. And wow. it was some terrible situation, but this entity or whatever was controlling the girl lashed out, and of course the ending of the show, you have some interviews with some of the top government officials that were in charge of the experiment, and they were all saying, well, the whole thing ended in disaster and we shut the whole thing down. So I think there is some evidence out there that something exists. They always say, and y'all all heard it, that we only use 10% of our brain. Mm-hmm. Some people would say the psychic power actually is what we already have within us. We just don't know how to access it. I've heard that we only use 10%. The other 90% of our brain is untapped as far as what things are there that we could do if we knew how to access that. And people that maybe can access 20% of that are very, are kind of people who do great things. And we wonder, what's the secret of the success and all this other stuff. Well, maybe they're touching on some parts of their brain that maybe the general population can't. I don't know. I've kind of found that interesting because I've always heard that the 10%, deal.
Yeah, I'm not sure that if I heard something about that was kind of discrediting that as like you only use 10% at a time, but that's not to say you're not using like the 100% of your brain. It's just you only use like sections of it, like.
Right.
I'm not sure if it would be the same way.
I don't know.
I don't know if that's.
I didn't.
But to help back up your claim at least a little bit, like the idea of like placebos and stuff is what gets me interested in, like maybe not psychic stuff, but just like the power of the mind, like what maybe not like your mind projecting out of your body and doing something else, but like at least like what your mind can do to your own body. Of like,
you've got placebos and you have nocebos. So, and nobody disputes that. But when you look at, every neurotransmitter that you have in your brain is only found in one other place in your body, and it's your gut. And what do we talk about people having? Yeah. Gut impressions, gut feelings.
What's that initial, you just got that feeling about somebody.
You meet somebody and, or it's like if you're in a restaurant, you'll feel somebody looking at you, and you turn your head. So what is that? Is that your gut feel? Like, because we recognize that animals have instincts. Why can't people have instincts too?
I think we actually do. I really do. But we're the University of Arizona actually had a dedicated lab for this phenomenon. It was called Veritas, and it studied psychic phenomenon, but concluded its efforts in 2008. The director left and went on to start the Windbridge Research Center, which of all things certifies mediums.
Wow.
There you go.
I think it's more so maybe not the idea of like a placebo, but just what I've heard numerous people talk about is like if you can believe it enough in your mind and like in your heart, like if you really can believe something, like there's a change that happens in your body. Like, like I said, I'm not saying that I try to discredit the idea of like your mind or, outside of yourself. But like, I know for a fact from me personally, I've seen it firsthand. If like someone believes they're going to get better, like they're going to get better. But if someone believes they're never going to get better, then it's just never going to happen. You know what I mean? Like that kind of idea of like perpetuating this, like, I've seen it in my own friends and family before of like, just keeping a negative outlook, a negative mindset on something will just, your body just does something different. Whereas like if you have some sort of hope, if you have some sort of like positive thought, like that really helps your body in some way to help.
Have either of you ever had a psychic reading by somebody?
No.
I'm trying to remember. I've had, when I was younger, I dabbled in tarot cards and, kind of that foolishness. I never fooled with a Ouija board. I never want to do that. But I had some experiences one time happen where we had some things go on that were kind of unexplainable. That stopped as soon as we stopped fooling with it. And so
I've talked about something like that on this podcast before with myself.
Yeah, I threw everything away. I didn't want to fool with it because it just didn't feel right.
I've never had anything professionally, but like I've had a friend that like looked at my palms and was like, "Oh, I can see your future," and I was like, "Yeah, right." But that was
I think everybody's had their horoscope, or
right.
There's a lot of people read their horoscopes. I like to read what I'm a Leo, so I'd like to see what they
Shocking.
say. Yeah, unbelievable, huh? But believe it or not, 52% of the U.S. population profess to having a paranormal belief or experience.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's this is from Chapman University, and it's based on a book called Shifting Systems of Faith Fuel a Rise in Paranormal Belief.
Say that 5 times fast.
I'm telling you, it would get your tongue all tied up.
Yeah. Where's your beat button?
Yeah, right.
That was October 23rd, 2019 when that book came out. And it said the shift from institutional to personal belief structures could be one reason for the rise in the reports of paranormal experiences. So You know,
I've never had anything. This is where I have a hard time, like being like super on board with like some when it comes to like paranormal or like these things like that. I've never had anything like that. I've never had an experience like that I couldn't explain away, or I had like facts to dispute something about it. Personally, I've had
didn't your mom ever, like, you come home and your mom just knew that you had done something bad? And there was no way for her to know, but she just knew?
I mean, not necessarily, but like
because mama's instincts, that's 100% psychic.
But a lot of times there was evidence that I think I left behind to like, after the fact, I've been like, oh, okay. For me, like I've had more like spiritual experiences where I feel like I have like in my own faith or like in a worship setting, like I have felt like a presence. I have felt something like that. Like I can say that. But when it comes to something like outside of those kind of areas is where like for me, like I've never like anything that I've been to that's like, oh, it's haunted. Like I think it's also because I do production. I do stage work. I do like that. So like I think I already have a keen eye for like a lot of stuff. I'm like, this is all rigged or this is this. And like I can really explain it away because like I think I know too much. So like my suspension of disbelief for like some things like that are always kind of, I think, a little bit more pessimistic in that regard. But I'm not to say that none of that exists. It's the same thing with the alien stuff. I'm not going to never say never. But I haven't experienced it myself where I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm like a firm believer. So that's just what
I have probably had between 2 and 3 dozen psychic readings over my life.
Okay.
My mom was into that when I was a kid, and she would take me to all over Ontario to all these these people.
Yeah.
I even saw Sylvia Brown. Like right when she's starting to make it big, we've gone to different psychic villages or towns, and some really interesting. We've done some really interesting things over the years because it's an interest, and there are people that you just know that they're just cold reading. They're just
feeling for it, yeah.
Whether they're just using tarot card, whatever they might be doing, because it's just like I think. And this whole thing spurred off of a conversation that Stoney and I had, and that's why I presented the topic to you guys. Right. But it's like I remember being maybe 13 years old, and they brought a lady to the resort that we had contracted at, and she knew nothing about us. This was pre-internet, but when Jason and I were 13, this was definitely pre-internet.
Yeah.
There was no way to learn anything about anybody.
Right.
And we lived in a small town. This lady came from, several hours away. And when I sat down with her, and I was one of the first people to sit down with her, so it wasn't like she could glean the information from anybody else. She was just like, you have a small dog named Fred, don't you? And I was like, what?
Yeah.
That was a little eerily specific. And, a lot of the stuff that she told me that day was just eerily specific, that there was no way. We had a little Shih Tzu named Fred, and she was, talking about different things, and none of it was earth-shattering, but just the depth of the information that she had and the specifics that she had. There is no way for someone to reasonably know that. In this day and age, internet, everyone can find out anything about anybody in 5 seconds. Right. But back then, there was no way for that. I will tell you, my mom is one of those people that I think is psychic. That's why I say, it's like she'll know when you're up to something. And the day that Stoney had his accident at work, she said that she woke up and she felt horrible, like the sky was falling. And then she was like, when I called her, she was just like, she's like, I knew something was going to happen. When I was, as a teenager, she would send me home from work. She was like, you need to go home and check on the dog. Something's wrong with the dog. And I went home and the dog was going into a coma because she'd been bitten by a bug.
Wow.
She was allergic. But, it was just, she just has, throughout my life, she's got these little flashes. Right. And it's just like, it's just too weird and too specific.
And see, it's things like that I'm not going to say that that's not real. Mm-hmm. I haven't experienced that myself, but like I felt like if my mom had some sort, I mean, like I'm not to say it like my mom hasn't had like some pretty like big religious spiritual experiences I've been a part of, and I've been like, wow, that's crazy. So I'm able to believe that sort of stuff. I'm able to believe your mom probably has some sort of, she's in tune with something. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to say never to
She
anything.
doesn't do predictions. She'll just get this feeling.
You're right,
exactly.
And you need to go.
That's what I'm saying is, what is that feel? Where is that coming from?
I think you're tapping into, if everything on earth is energy, then what if some people are tapping into those energies? You know, like you're in law enforcement. Look at how many police officers say that they had a gut feeling about something, and that's what saved their life, or that's what helped them catch somebody, or that's, what led to,
I've had in my life, I've had a little bit of a gut feeling like about people sometimes. And I've been able to rely on it pretty well. Where like I just get like a weird feeling from somebody, and I'm like, and not to judge the person, not to like. And a lot of times I'm still cordial and I'm still nice with them, but a lot of times I'm always like, I just have a little something off. And more often,
how many times when you meet someone the first time is your gut feeling about them proved to be right later on down the road?
More often than not, for me, like all the times that I've had that weird sensation where I'm like, I don't know, I can't describe it. And I told my mom that before. She used to run a school, and so I would see students, and more often than not, my mom would be like, "Hey, like, is it like how do you feel about this new person?" And I'd be like, I just have that weird feeling. My mom's like, "Okay," and then 9 times out of 10, those kids were like a problem, or they would cause a ruckus or whatever. My mom would have to kick them to the curb.
Well, we've kind of touched on this a little bit about drawing upon a universal source of knowledge.
Yeah.
And we talked about this with Edgar Casey.
I know where you're going with this.
With the Akashic Records. We talked about doing a podcast on that, but we haven't done that one yet.
You and your records.
I know. I love it.
I know.
But,
yeah,
I mean, it's, I think the world is more mysterious than what we want to make it out. I think for a lot of people, I think the idea of the world being random and not necessarily being so predictable, I think frightens people.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're so mired in that kind of structured way of looking at what we call reality, I think it frightens people. I think it really makes them challenge their, what is this world? What do we really know?
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, we really don't know a whole lot.
We do. We know what we're told.
Yeah, we do. I mean, we got scientists who will say, of course, we all know there's the universal laws of physics, right? I mean, gravity and in these, but there are phenomena that defy those laws.
Yeah.
That happen in our own observable universe.
Right.
So the idea that there could be something else that we just don't know about. That's why when people say, well, I don't believe in this kind of stuff, it's like, are you saying that to kind of protect yourself?
Right. Yeah.
Or are you saying that from a position of authority? Like, okay, well, that doesn't exist. Well, how do you know it doesn't exist? I mean, you don't really know that. I mean, okay, if it makes you feel better and you've kind of organized your world around you that this is the way this works and that way this works. And if I do this, this is going to happen. And if any of that stuff changes, it just blows people's minds.
Yeah. Well,
people have a very black and white picture of what their world is very often, and when you throw in any shades of color or any shades of gray, they're not able to cope with that. And it's like here in the South, you definitely have a religious bent that, and there's you just have to type in our psychics reel online and you'll see a lot of religious things talking about different quotations from the Bible that, says not to listen to this or not to listen to that, or false prophets and, all this kind of stuff. But then there's just as many quotes in the Bible that says that they are real and that, as we get closer to end times, God is going to kind of turn over more and more of his spirit to people so that they can pick up on this stuff and receive messages directly from the source. The whole spiritualist movement from the 1840s on, which we talked about quite a bit in the Edgar Casey show, I think that kind of set the stage for a lot of the foundation of what is America.
Oh,
and, right now, kind of unity and science of mind has taken that spiritual, football and run with it. But it's the same thing. Those people that are doing that, they don't believe that they're speaking to the devil. They believe that they're channeling God, or that they're tapping into, the one source, the master creator. People, I don't think it comes from a negative place,
right.
But you'll have people here that say that it is negative.
Well, I think, and this is kind of, with my own religious constructs that I kind of subscribe to. I mean, of course, they're how I view the universe. I believe, God made everything that there is. Okay. But I think there are things that, we haven't found out about yet. Not that they're inherently evil.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's not objective evil.
Right.
I do believe that. And I do sometimes people go off into certain things that opens the wrong channels into this other mysterious area that we don't know anything about, and bad things have happened to these people. I think there's a difference between what I would call the spiritual and that kind of stuff versus what's already present in our own physical universe. And that's where I kind of draw the distinction. I believe ESP, is already a part of our physical universe. We just haven't found a way of
quantifying
of reaching it. And okay, how does this work? I have distinctions on that. Some people want to kind of merge what I call the spiritual realm, what I call the supernatural realm, to what's our own physical universe, which are two distinct things.
Right.
We haven't even discovered what our own physical universe has to offer us yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just haven't.
The thing I was going to say before, which kind of talks about with the alien discussion we had, is I think that sometimes people aren't willing to accept something new like aliens or like the idea of this kind of stuff because it does like fundamentally shake some
preconceived notions,
right? Or some beliefs that like, or again, some like subsection of religions, like we'll talk heavily against some of that kind of stuff where it's like, and then all of a sudden when it becomes true, it's like now you start questioning a lot of things. So like I understand that's why for me, like I try to take this neutral ground when it comes to some of this stuff because I do believe there's some sort of spiritual realm. I do, and like we're talking about all this stuff that people have connections or feelings and stuff, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do have some sort of like maybe they can just connect in a little better than some other people. Maybe that gut feeling that I do get for some people is some sort of latent thing where I'm able just to kind of connect in and feel something that I know. It's not quantifiable.
Well,
and, it doesn't mean anything. So, but
yeah, I mean, I'm not. I'm just me personally. I'm not going to go and try to contact.
Right.
People that are dead,
and I think that's
and kind of I think you get in that channeling and mediums and I just personally others may think nothing of it, but
that's whenever we were taught the bedrock of what this topic is. But when we were talking about it in the pre-show, I think we were talking about it, and you had said something about like what's the difference between like a prophet that has prophecies about something, and like a fortune teller and someone that's like more in that. And I was like, I think a lot of it has to do with like context, and I think some of that context is that sort of stuff where it's like once you start. You can
kind of shake it up a little bit.
Right.
I mean,
to say that like some of the I don't know what they were called, the people you had seen up in Canada, like like maybe they were like with good intention and maybe they did have some sort of, they weren't dabbling in some sort of nefarious arts or something. But I do think there's a again, like I said, there's a gray area where it's like, at what point do you fall over into like now you're starting to like deal with some.
I think this was probably the only disagreement that Stoney and I have ever really had.
Really?
And and it got quite heated the one day because we usually just get along
I
really
would have loved to have been a fly on the wall on that. Listen to that conversation.
Because he is much more, there can be prophets.
Right.
But he does not believe in psychics, and he thinks he just thinks that whatever they're that's all evil. And I'm like, I don't feel the same way.
Right.
And he's like, well, somebody, if they had a gift from God, they wouldn't charge for it. And I said, well, okay, extend that one step further. If you're an artist, you still have to you have to feed yourself. Mm-hmm. So why is it okay for a artist to charge someone for their paintings, or a musician to charge someone to play a concert for them, but not a psychic to charge for giving somebody some prophecies?
Right.
So, and he is like drawn his line in the sand that no, if you have a gift from God, you can't charge from it. I'm like, well, then you have a double standard, because I think that it's just yet another gift that some people have.
Right.
And he was just like, because he's, you've all heard his stories about, some of the there's a prophetess at church that had predicted us meeting, and that when we were going to, get married and all that kind of stuff.
And maybe that's
and,
that. Maybe
and
that's
he
that.
believes in that.
Right.
But if somebody, it's like when we were walking around in New Orleans and there was, the tarot card readers in Jackson Square, he was just like, he was horrified when I said, want to get a read? He was like, no.
But see, like, I guess the point that I was trying to make a second ago was like, what if that person that he's talking about, now Stoney may get upset by me saying this, but like, what if the people you are seeing, what if the people like are all on that spectrum of people that have some sort of gift, but use it for different reasons? So what if the people really can predict something, but maybe not don't use it in a Christian or more religious aspect, as opposed to someone who does have a gift but may use it for profit, in some way.
I don't see the problem there. I will say this, because I have studied this. I've been reading books on this topic probably since I was 6 years old.
Right.
So this is something I am well versed in.
Yeah.
I think that when you see psychics, like Sylvia Browne is a perfect example. When I went to one of those leisure learning places that used to be popular in the 90s, and people would come in and they would have these great big fill auditoriums and listen to speakers kind of thing. And she picked me out of the crowd and predicted that I was going to go into a medical field like nursing. She had no clue. You can't look at somebody and know any of that kind of stuff. And, I didn't go into nursing, but I did go into a medical field. So I thought it was kind of interesting, because she just did spot things, where they pull people out of the audience and talk. But then later on, I would see her on the Montel Williams show. And it was like the more fame she got, the more removed she got from her gift. And because early on she had a track record of helping police find missing children and bodies of people that had been murdered and all this kind of stuff. But it was like the more that she got caught up in the ego and satisfying her ego, I think that you see that with psychics all the time, that the more famous they get, the further apart from that gift or from that source that they are.
You wonder what causes that, if that's some universal. You get too mired in the world, and somehow that severs that connection to whatever part of the universe that you're drawing that from. I don't know. I mean, that's.
Or what if it like that? I if you want to call it a power, for lack of a better term, like if that power of some sort, it doesn't like to be controlled in some way, where it's like the second you try and like when you try to wrangle up that sort of power,
when you try to control it says it lets go,
right,
and
right. It's the second you try to make that about like or
and
potentially.
To me, there is a big difference between like the psychic detectives that have helped that have a long track record of helping law enforcement. They don't usually charge those agencies. They're volunteering their time, their energy, and their skills. There was a famous case here in New Orleans. Psychic Rosemary Kerr. She helped crack a New Orleans case from her home in California, and it was the murder of Andre Daigle. And she led investigators right to his truck, which was in Slidell.
Oh my!
That's what I'm saying. So there's something there.
There is a difference, though, to me, between those psychic detectives and the celebrity psychics. Because, like I said, once it passes into the realm of the celebrity, and you're on TV, and you're doing the John Edwards things.
Yeah,
to me,
I remember
watch
watching
him,
John
and it looks
Edwards
like cold
on
reading.
TV. He came on late night.
But remember the 90s? We had Miss Cleo, we had the Psychic Network and the Psychic Hotline, and it's like if you were watching TV past 10 o'clock at night, there was all these infomercials for all that kind of stuff. And it's I don't watch TV. I don't even have cable anymore, so I couldn't tell you if it's on. But
I'm gonna tell you, the psychic business is big business.
Really?
Yes. It's since 2005. It's reached 2.2 billion in revenue.
Okay.
And it's expected to exceed 2.4 billion by the end of 2024.
Kind of expected it to be a little higher, to be honest.
Yeah. It's in the highest, the states with the highest percentage of people who work in those industries. Florida, followed by California, New York, and Texas.
Wow.
So
those are big people areas.
Yeah.
A lot of people. Whenever I lived in Canada, there was a group of people that I had some friends, and they were into like the community of people that that loved like the gemstones and stuff. They were really big into like the essential oils and and they believed their stones had power and stuff. And for me, like I never really got behind it, but even that, just having like this this feeling about something and like projecting and like this thing has power, like and of course that like also potentially.
I actually read a news article prior, preparing for this, and it was something to the effect. It was titled something like "America loves Jesus, but crystals too."
Yeah, I could see that.
And it said like 40% of Americans, walked that line where they believed in both.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of funny with your crystal reference.
Like I said, I had only lived there for a couple of years, but there was like so many like incense shops with like the tapestries, and like it was just such like an aesthetic that everyone loved, where you had like the plants and they had their rocks and gemstones, and so many of them were like, again, I never really subscribed to it, so I may not have been in that same headspace or spiritual, what you want to call it, that they were, but they were always like, they gravitate to what stone calls you or something like that, and I was always like, this one looks cool. And they were like, oh, so they all have meetings and stuff.
That's the thing, is like there's...
You've got to want to believe, too. I think, unfortunately, a lot of times people that are drawn to this are... I read about some people who went out and tried to debunk this stuff, and they ran across a lot of charlatans. I mean, just the people that a lot of times are drawn to this are people they kind of want to know what the future holds. They kind of want to know what, can you contact my dead loved one? Or, it's a lot of, sometimes
they're looking for comfort. They're looking for reassurance. It's
sad in many ways that people that you spend a lot of money on this stuff. I mean, the vast majority of psychics don't make that much money. I think I saw a figure where they make on average about $44,000 a year, which is not a whole lot of money.
Right.
It really isn't. There's probably like 5 or 6 psychics that make, the big money. And then there's maybe a half dozen or so that make kind of in between that, but the vast majority of psychics are under $50,000 a year, which is, that's not a lot of money. I mean, it just isn't, but I mean, it's something, so, but it's like anything. I've got some more numbers here. A YouGov American study in 2021, 1 in 5, 22% have consulted a fortune teller, medium, or psychic. Women more than men. The average age of people seeking a psychic, men were 27 to 54, and women were 21 to 60. A French study in 2018, 10% of the men and 27% of the women consulted a psychic. And then a Polish study, up to 50% of the population has interacted with a psychic.
Wow.
And I wonder if that's because so much of the population there is Catholic, and there's a little bit more of
Well, there is exactly
Yeah.
what you were saying, Miranda. That I saw in this other. I've got another deal here. It's a big old publication on just psychic mediums and tarot 2023 best statistics, facts, and trends. So
Wow.
it gives everything regarding this topic. And areas that are more religious generally have higher incidences of people accepting the paranormal and psychic experiences. The more atheistic an area is, the less would believe in New Age.
which is interesting. Isn't
Yes,
it?
exactly.
It's kind of contrary to what you would
exactly
expect.
you would think, but it's I think the idea that if you're open to the possibility that there are other forces greater than me at work, I think those channels open up. I really do. When you kind of close your mind off and you're so concrete, if that's the best way of putting it, I think if there's any potential there, I think you prevent yourself from really potentially being affected by that.
Right.
Not to say it doesn't happen,
Right.
but it just seems less likely.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that just hear the word psychic and they just think charlatan,
Mm.
or they
Because
think
there's a
fortune
lot-
teller.
there's a lot
and
of
there
charlatans.
There
Right.
absolutely there is.
Well, it's the same kind of thing with I think Christianity. A lot of times, whenever maybe not in the area we're in, but I know for a fact there are people that the second you say Christianity, they're always like, oh, a bunch of crazy wackos, and it's like because again, there is like a noisy minority that is kind of crazy that of course gives the whole, I think, a bad name for people that are not part of the community. I think the same thing for this is like if you're not part of any kind of psychic community or don't understand, not part of like any kind of group from the outside, all you get is any information from like charlatans or the crazies or whatever, and it's like that's what you imagine the whole is.
I think there's just a lot more under this umbrella than what you initially give it credence to at first thought.
Right,
Because like I
right.
said, you think psychic, you think, someone's, giving you information, giving a reading, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But, I look back to my childhood and I have one set of grandparents that, was very British, very old school, very, they were Presbyterian.
Okay.
They would not believe, if you said psychic, they were just like, oh, that's just crap. But I will tell you, those same grandparents were the most superstitious people you ever wanted to have. You
Interesting.
would, you could not put your shoes on certain. If you put your shoes on the table, oh my God, they would probably throw it out the table. You don't walk under a ladder. You don't do this. You don't do that. You don't wash your, you don't wash your sheets on a certain day of the week.
Right.
Like, I swear my grandmother had a superstition for everything going.
Really?
And I'm just thinking, well, you know what? She would never admit to anything about psychics, but what do you think that is? That's all paranormal stuff. That
Yeah.
all still fits under the same umbrella in my mind, because if you think that you're going to have these negative consequences if you open up an umbrella in the house, why is that?
Right.
Why is that?
It's the funniest thing is I know. See, I don't necessarily subscribe to all that. That can walk, but you know what? I still find myself at times being cognizant of those things.
Really?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of me is like, I don't care, but then another part of me is like, well, I'm just not going to go test fate.
Right.
It's like
You don't go
it's-
seeking out ladders
I
to
don't
go walk underneath.
seeking this stuff out. I mean, it's I don't know. It's to me, this whole, all of this stuff is, I have to kind of check myself at times because I do have a certain way of how I think the world operates. But there are times that I'm wondering, it's like, I don't know if maybe I'm not getting it. I'm not giving enough room for the potential that there's something else. I'm very open about a lot of these things. You can probably count me into, I believe in I believe in ESP.
Right,
I
right.
believe in all the things that a lot of people would think are crazy. I believe in extraterrestrials. I believe in the lost city of Atlantis. I believe in all these things that are
the
kind of
Akashic records.
The Akashic records. I believe in all this kind of stuff because I've always been open to it. I really have. I've never really closed myself off completely to that because we have a mysterious universe. And as I said, I draw a distinction between the physical world, our physical universe, and what I would call a spiritual dimension, which is, to me, completely different. I still feel like we have so much left to learn of our own physical universe.
Well, you seem, from what I know of you, you walk a line between, you're wearing your faith on your sleeve because you are a religious person, you go to church, and you make no bones about that. But would you, being a Catholic man, we have a very well-known Catholic healer in this town, Sister Dulce. Would you go and see her?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I've known many people that have gone to see her.
She's believe it or not, if the Pope gets sick, she's flown to the Vatican to heal.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's a little local lady. Like, she's wheelchair bound. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, she's actually doesn't live, where her place is actually not far from my house.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, she's a very fascinating person. I believe my own parents have gone there.
Right. And like this same thing for myself.
That's a healing and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm very open to all of those things. I think where people get the idea of it running afoul of their beliefs with, the Bible, has said about divination and you'd have to kind of understand the context of why that sort of stuff was prohibited. Because, if you read the Old Testament, it's a whole different, you have to really kind of understand that time period, understand why those prohibitions were put in there. And it's because all those other cultures did not believe in a monotheistic God. They believed in multiple gods. So in their cosmology, the idea of all this kind of stuff was just normal.
You were moving
for them
to monotheism from a shamanistic type of thing.
So it was it's the idea of not to get too religious with this episode, but the fact of the matter is, if you subscribe to being either Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim, the ultimate divine is God, and nobody should be, and only God knows the future. He only knows all these other things, and no one else knows this. And you shouldn't be diving into that and attempting to find out what that stuff is. And so I think that's where these ideas of prohibition come from that has now been passed down, why people believe a certain way about, I'm not going to go consult a medium to go talk to my dead grandmother.
Right.
That to me is where I think the line gets drawn for a lot of people.
Right.
It's like, okay, intellectually, I can assent to the idea that there are things out there that I don't understand. And then there's some things that I feel that kind of transgress certain things, barriers that were put there for our own benefit. And I think that's where where you get just like Stoney saying, well, I don't want to have anything to do with the psychic because the Bible says you can't deal with that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's true. But also in the Bible, you do have a passage in there where there is an oracle or a seer that calls down the spirit of a dead person. So it's as I said, that could be a topic. It's how the Bible and the interpretation of the Old Testament and how all that kind of came to be. But I do think that's what I'm saying. There is a a way of intellectually assenting to the fact that there are things that I don't understand,
right?
That there could be answers to that we just have not found out yet. And then what I call another dimension of being that is really beyond our, and we shouldn't be diving into that to try to go find what my future is going to be, because the reality is, do you really want to know what your future is? I don't know if I would want to know that. I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I just, I don't know. To me, that would go down open up a
it depends.
Open up Pandora's
you
box.
want to know if you're going to be able to run your marathon coming
Right,
up.
well, I mean,
there's certain things where you just like a little nudge, or is this? Am I going in the right direction in life? But with what you were saying about mediums, I get that. I think that's probably the case. A lot of Americans would not say, "I'm going to go and hire a medium to talk to my grandma because I really miss her." But when you look at polls, and there has been hundreds of polls of people and their experience when a loved one has passed, and collectively 1/3 to 2/3 of Americans polled report that they've experienced a loved one visiting them after that person's death.
No, that's interesting.
So,
yeah,
so that's a lot. If you have, between 33 and 66% of Americans
Right.
saying that, their grandpa visited them, they smelt their cologne, they spoke to him in a dream, that's very common. They spoke to him in a dream, but they felt comforted because of that situation. It's very rarely ever negative. It's usually almost always a positive. They came to say
Right.
goodbye. They came to say they love them, kind of thing. And sometimes it's as simple as a smell.
right.
But if up to 2/3 of Americans have had that, they've had a psychic experience.
Right.
Whether they want to admit it or not, they've had a psychic experience.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The data, that's what surprised me, is just the number of people that have had some sort of experience that would fall under the umbrella of a psychic experience. I think sometimes we get caught up in the, unless you're doing X, then okay, now I'm doing this. I'm dealing with a psychic experience, but they're not thinking about all these other things.
Exactly.
Right.
Interesting.
That with my background, I always try to take everything back to a historical context, and one of the things that we have in human history is a long history, just even in modern recorded times of look at Mother Shipton, Nostradamus, Baba Vaga. We've got a lot of people, John Dee, that did these predictions that we still talk about right now. Like Nostradamus, he wrote his book, Les Prophéties, back in 1555. And here we are over 5 centuries later. We're still looking through that book thinking, oh my gosh, he predicted COVID. Oh my gosh, he predicted Obama. Oh my gosh, he predicted. So this is not a new phenomena. It's just like.
No, it's been around.
This has been around. People have been, I think, captivated. Good and bad by this, and I agree with you, Jason. I think that we have to be careful that a lot of times when people are channeling different things, I think that low-level entities are what they're accessing, because I don't think a higher-level entity is ever going to tell you some of the kind of negative stuff that these low levels do. And I think that they're good mimics. So I think that you have to be very cautious and careful if you're delving into this world, and you have to be cautious on who you listen to, because if someone just is asking you money and telling you that they're removing generational curses and all this kind of stuff, you need to run.
Yeah.
That's just scammy. But if you give somebody some money and they give you some entertainment for an hour that makes you feel better or makes you feel like you've done some right things in your life or whatever, I don't see to me it's a no harm no foul kind of situation.
Yeah.
Ian, what do you?
The big thing for me.
How do you straddle that line? Or is there even a line for you?
It's like I said. I'm not saying that there aren't people out there that probably have some sort of spiritual gift that probably don't use them in like a religious aspect or religious space. And I believe they probably do have some sort of power that, of course, they're using for whatever game they would like to use it for. And I do believe there are people out there that I think do commune with spirits that I think is probably dealing with some darker sides of things that I would wholeheartedly stay away from. But for me, the thing I can say that I've experienced myself, like in some religious context and some worship settings and things like that in my own personal life, is like there has been a few occurrences where something akin to what Miranda was talking about, of like this guest speaker, this pastor or this musician, whoever it may be, doesn't know me from anybody else in the room, but has me having a one-on-one with that person has been able to look at me and like encourage me through some things that I've been going through that I did not talk to them about at all, and they would have no idea about. And some may say like, oh, it's vague enough where they could be talking about anything, but like I felt in my heart of hearts that they were really speaking to me in that moment about something that like they had no knowledge of.
Well, it's like that expression, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Right.
What universal power is putting that into place? Because look at how many times in your own life that the right person gave you the right encouragement at the right time, or turned you on to something that ended up changing the course of your life.
Right. There was a mentor of mine that I hadn't voiced to him that I was struggling about what I should do creatively, or what I should do for a career, or what I should do musically. I didn't talk to him about any of the stuff behind the scenes, but I trusted him enough, and I talked to him, and I was like, I just feel a little lost. And without me like going into any more information, he was able to encourage me in such a way, and he was able to say just the right things that answered my question without me even asking it. And I was like, that felt like, for me, that was a spiritual thing, that I feel like he was speaking through something that was not of himself in a way. And so for me, like that's what I think I said towards the beginning. I never want to say never, because I don't want to sit here and say like, oh, it's never going to happen. Aliens don't exist. Spiritual realm, nothing like that. Because I'm like, I feel like I have enough faith to know that there's something out there that I don't have 100% grasp on, and I probably never will. Do I believe all of it? I do believe there's people out there that are out to make a profit, and of course are, even in the Christian realm, they have been, televangelists for time immemorial.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that have been out to make some money, and of course do nefarious things. So there's always those people, and I think I'm, I don't know. I go, especially when it comes to this sort of stuff, I go a lot by what my heart and my gut tells me. It's like if I'm in a situation and I feel like I've been in a few circumstances with those people I was talking about in Canada, where I got that feeling of like, this doesn't feel right, and I've removed myself from that scenario because something
told you
right, and
get your butt out of there,
right. Whereas there's in the opposite spectrum, I've been around people, or I've been in certain atmospheres where I'm like, this feels encouraging, and this feels like, what I need to hear right now. And like, so that's how I discern it. Like, is that a smart? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think that, a lot of the tools, whether it's tarot or Ouija or pendulums or, or candles or crystals or any of these kinds of things.
Right.
I don't know how much power or credence to put into what they actually do, or if they're just a manner for someone to channel or focus their energy and be able to tap into whatever that source is.
Right.
Would I be pulling out a Ouija board in the middle of the house? I got some stuff that looks like it, but no, there's no planchettes or anything around.
Right.
I think that some things do have more of a negative connotation like that.
Right.
But to me, they're just all tools. Mm-hmm. It's
I think even in religious spaces, there are a lot of items that are symbolic, or that are that isn't a one-to-one, but are references, or like this is ceremonial. This isn't the exact thing, but this is to.
Well, if you've ever sat down and played a game of cards with your friends, the modern deck of cards is a evolution of a tarot deck.
Yeah, it is.
Mm.
So, it's like, I know, like I was telling you about my grandma who grew up in a very kind of, very fun. I don't know if it was, I don't know what the religion was, but her dad was strict. And if, 8 kids, they had one deck of cards, and he would come in if he found it, he would just throw it into the fire.
Really?
Yeah. And, they weren't allowed to have dolls or anything because those were effigies. And, it's just like all that kind of stuff. It sounded like a very miserable childhood, when she would describe their existence.
And see, like that kind of stuff, I'm like what is it, the item itself that is intrinsically bad, or is it the use of it? Like I have 2 decks of cards over here, and it's like I've played a game of solitaire with them, so it's like the intention. It's just a harmless game of cards. Same sort of thing with like it's adult.
It depends on in the case what Miranda just said. It was probably the interpretation of whatever the biblical tradition that was handed down, and it had nothing to do with cards because cards generally attribute to gambling, and that would kind of fall in those kind of things. And then I mean it's some people are going to be, as I said, your worldview.
Yeah.
What is your reality?
Yep.
How are you seeing? What lens are you seeing the world? How is your world, your universe work around you?
Yeah.
And the minute you challenge any of that stuff, well, I got a problem. And some people just brush it off. Some people it becomes a crisis.
Yeah. I mean,
I
don't think we should touch on it now, but I think it could even be extended beyond just beliefs and religious beliefs, but also like political views too. It's like there's a certain line in the sand that like you draw that like it's hard to find a gray area when it's like so staunchly this way.
Well, it said 41% of U.S. adults believe psychics have genuine abilities. African Americans were more likely to hold New Age beliefs.
Interesting.
I wonder if that comes from some cultural...
and that's what I'm thinking, and I have to go into the data that I was looking at because I pulled all these from these reports. The average age was 50 to 64.
Interesting.
So a little bit older than your previous,
And Democrats were more spiritual than Republicans.
Stop it. What?
But again, that's the religious thing comes in, into that.
At least according to the what this
but a
report
lot of African
showed.
Traditions
were very
spiritual, and they had shaman, and they had all these different kinds of things, and the whole hoodoo element comes from hoodoo and voodoo and all that kind of stuff. All has those little kernels that come from from Africa and from the Caribbean and all these cultures that got melded together. I think that maybe
Southern and Eastern Europe are very heavy on the spiritual side versus Northern Europe.
Although you look at all the fairy folk and the fey tradition,
exactly. So
my family is as British as it gets, and all of that kind of stuff all stems from the British, Irish, Scotch traditions.
Yeah.
Right.
So
once you start going to like Scandinavian stuff, where it's like that's all
they've got their own. In Scandinavia, they'll move a road because it's over a fey line, or a troll doesn't want it there.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there's. This, like Jason said, this world is much more complex than we openly want to acknowledge.
Yeah.
There are things we don't know. It's like I watch a show because I love watching shows on, haunted houses. And people have, they do a reenactment of what happened in that given home. And I do recall that that people try to call in different people to come help them. Different spiritual, I forget what the spiritual background of these people were, or if they were any. But, at the end, she goes that nobody could help me. And she goes, I just believe that there's some things we just don't know.
There you go.
Yep.
We just don't know. And, but yeah, it's going to be, this topic really brings back, because I love watching shows about this kind of stuff. I kind of find it fascinating.
Yeah.
But I mean, for the military and for us to spend the amount of money we've spent on it, and I think they're still spending money on it, it tells me to believe that this is more ingrained than just like the idea of UFOs. I just think.
Well, and other cultures are still, like Russia, they're still dumping money into this publicly and openly.
Yeah.
So
there's belief in this, that there's real, that I can move things with my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I can influence somebody else's thoughts with my own thoughts.
Crazy.
When you were doing your research, did you see some information about Uri Geller? You'd probably know where I'm looking at your face. You're knowing where I'm going with this.
Uh-oh.
Uri Geller, Ian, was a little bit before your time.
Okay.
But he was a very well-known Israeli psychic. He did all the bending of the spoons, and he would touch the spoons and they would fall into pieces or bend completely in half. But there is a lot of evidence that he actually did training for various governments and that he was both a Mossad and a U.S. double agent.
Wow.
So there's you want to do some interesting reading, look up Geller.
Interesting.
Good stuff. They said another thing that was interesting, the term psychic is the 12th most expensive ad word per Google.
What?
That's crazy.
According to Mobile Squared, those who searched psychic spent an average of $44 on product services.
I want to know what the like top 5 most expensive words are now. That's interesting.
That might be a good topic for a show.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's cool to know.
That's fascinating.
As a matter of fact, I may have it.
That's
I actually may have it if you give me a moment. I may be able to tell you exactly what is the most expensive word, but it may be in this big old document about.
Well, that's okay. Well, like I do think that would be an interesting topic. If nothing else, like maybe not a full topic, but it could be. We can. We'll tantalize the audience. Maybe in the coming weeks you may hear that one. Who knows?
Yeah.
Add it to the whiteboard.
Yeah, add it to the whiteboard as we say.
Good stuff.
Well, is there anything else you guys want to touch on for this as we?
Well, since I am probably the least religious person here at the table. Like I said, I like to say that I'm spiritual. I'm not religious.
Right.
But I did, in the course of all of this, I came upon 2 different quotes for the religiously set members of our audience who want to, who would challenge that the Bible says, to ignore all this kind of stuff. And one was Acts 2:17. It shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out of my soul on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. And lastly, God speaks to prophets in 3 different ways. And the quote is from Numbers 12:16, 8. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. I speak to him with his face to face.
Interesting.
So it's in there.
Acts is a good book.
It is in there.
Yeah.
So it's like I said, we live in a very complex world. I think we have a lot of tools at our disposal, and regardless of what you choose to believe, you shouldn't be made bad. You shouldn't feel bad about feeling the way you do.
Right. Oh, we got some numbers. I do want to save this though, because this would be really good. But I think he just found the numbers to it, so I don't want to spoil this for you guys. You'll find out.
I knew it was in there.
I
knew it was in here.
Yeah. He's got a little bar graph. It's really nice.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, on that note. Yeah. For those of you looking to reach out to us, we have a link tree or /Retrospect Pod where you can find all of our links. Or we have a Facebook page /Retrospect Pod. Most of the time you can look at us at Retrospect Pod, and we have all the different ways to get involved with us. Or if you can't fit your comment in the comment section of Facebook, we do have an email address called getoffendedtogether@gmail.com. But anyways, until next week, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. God bless.
And take care.